ruination, poverty, remains of ancient civilizations, and an age-old hatred between them. Once the promised land of God's chosen people, it is now a desolate realm of continuous warfare and bloodshed, a bitter battle of survival and vengeance that seems like a twisted destiny for this dry domain of mindless violence, where faiths clash and where there can be no real victor. This is the story of the misunderstood people of that place, a solitary island amongst the sea of foes. This is the story of Israel. After World War I, Britain declared that the British Mandate of Palestine should include a Jewish state. The Jews started to move into the area, but the Arabs already living there didn't like it and started organizing riots. This made the Brits limit the Jewish immigration in 1939. Other countries did not want to take in Jews either, which led to the forming of an organization focused on helping Jews to immigrate into Palestine. There were also a lot of Jewish refugees at the time, escaping the violence directed at them in Russia and Germany, and they saw escaping to Palestine as the safest option. During World War II, Jews were massacred in Central and Eastern Europe, resulting in an increase in the amount of refugees fleeing to Palestine. The Brits found themselves in a conflict with both the Jews and Arabs, so they decided to retreat from Palestine. The United Nations made a declaration stating that an Arab state and a Jewish state should be established in the area and Jerusalem should be made an international city. The Jews accepted this, but the Arabs declined the idea. On the 1st of December 1947, the Arabs started to attack Jewish settlements. A civil war started, in which the Jews were fighting for survival, but in the end they managed to win. The surrounding Arab countries decided to interfere, telling all the Arabs living in Palestine to leave the country. This resulted in 250,000 Arabs fleeing Palestine. The Jews declared the Jewish state of Israel independent on the 14th of May 1948, and immediately after this, the surrounding Arab countries attacked Israel. Israel hardly managed to win, losing the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in the war. Over 700,000 Arabs escaped the war from Israel, but also 850,000 Jews were forced to flee from Arab countries between 1948 and 1968. In 1956, the Egyptians decided to take control of the Suez Canal. The Brits and the French did not like this, since they owned most of the Suez Canal Company. They needed a reason to attack, so they asked the Jews to invade Gaza. As Egypt prepared to retaliate, the Brits declared that both Egypt and Israel should stay 10 kilometers from the canal. Egypt declined. They closed the canal and blew up the oil pipelines, so the Brits and the French invaded Port Said. Finally, the Brits and the French retreated when an agreement had been reached. According to it, Egypt should not attack Israel, like in 1948, and then peacekeepers would be deployed to the Sinai Peninsula. During the 1960s, a terrorist organization called Hamas got a lot of support from many Arab nations. Egypt, however, did not actively support Hamas, and the other Arab countries accused it of not resisting Israel decisively enough. When pressured by the other Arabs, Egypt started to prepare to war against Israel once again. First, they forced the UN to remove the peacekeepers from Sinai, and then they started to mobilize troops in the area. Inspired by Egypt's actions, the other Arab countries also started to prepare for a war. Israel made a preemptive strike and destroyed over 400 Egyptian fighters in one day, securing air superiority. Jordan attacked from the east, but Israel managed to repel the attack. At the same time, Syrian artillery was shelling Israeli settlements from the Golan Heights. Israel conquered the Golan Heights too, before the UN declared an armistice which both sides agreed on. Israel offered the areas it had conquered back to the Arabs if they only promised not to attack Israel again. The Arabs declined one after another, and the conquered areas were left for Israel. On the 6th of October 1973, the Egyptian army crossed the Suez Canal and pushed into Israel. The surprise attack was super effective because most of the IDF soldiers were at home enjoying Yom Kippur, the holiest festival in the Jewish calendar. Because of this, the Egyptians advanced into Israel, but the situation changed when the Israeli army was mobilized. At the same time, only 200 tanks were defending the Golan Heights against hugely superior Syrian forces. After large casualties, Israel managed to take back the Golan Heights, forcing Syria to an armistice. Meanwhile, Egypt, too, was forced to accept the armistice. In 1979, Egypt actually signed a peace treaty with Israel, getting Sinai back as a compensation. The terror against Jews intensified in the 1970s, and Israel retaliated by launching Operation Wrath of God, in which it hunted Palestinian terrorists in Europe. The Palestinians, however, managed to keep up their attacks, and the massacre in northern Israel in 1978 led to Operation Peace for Galilee. Israel occupied southern Lebanon. Israel acted together with the local Christians, who executed the massacres of Sabra and Shatila, resulting in from 700 to 3,500 dead Palestinian refugees. In general, the operation was a success for Israel. The First Intifada started after wide protests and rioting, in which one Palestinian was shot by an Israeli soldier. A huge uprising soon followed, and the final death toll of the First Intifada, which ended in 1993, was 1,400 dead Palestinians and 420 dead Israelis. After the Intifada ended, Israel and PLO signed the Oslo Accords, in which they recognized each other, and a Palestinian government was formed which started to control most of the Palestinian areas. In 1995, they signed another accord, which allowed PLO to return to the Palestinian territory. The current situation. Terrorism. Hamas is a Palestinian organization, and the biggest party in the Palestinian parliament since the spring of 2006. Many nations have classified it as a terrorist organization, since it has committed numerous terrorist attacks, mainly against Israel. In its constitution, Hamas states the uselessness of non-violent solutions to the Palestinian question, its goal, to destroy Israel, and founded Islamic State. In the summer of 2007, Hamas and Fatah were driven to conflict, after which Hamas was disbanded from the government, but it gained control of the Gaza Strip. During Hamas's reign over Gaza, the Palestinians have not followed the armistice agreement, but instead have continued rocket artillery strikes against Israel. Hezbollah, or God's Party, was founded in 1982 to oppose Israel's attack to Lebanon and also the seizing of South Lebanon. Many countries recognize it as a terrorist organization, although, for example, Russia does not. The government of Iran supports Hezbollah openly and even sent Revolutionary Guards to aid Hezbollah in banishing Israel from Lebanon. Hezbollah is also a parliamentary party in Lebanon's government. Hezbollah supports Bashar al-Assad and his retinue in the Syrian civil war. PLO, or Palestine Liberation Organization, was founded in 1964 to unite the widely dispersed Palestinian people. PLO's constitutional goals are to found the nation of Palestine and the utter destruction of Israel. Additionally, the Constitution states that armed conflict is the only way to save the Palestinians. It also tells that Zionism is based on racism and Nazism, and pleads other countries to prevent the existence and actions of Jews. In 1988, PLO recognized Israel's right to exist, and in 1996 it removed the parts in its constitution which stated otherwise. Actions against terrorism. The Safe Fence. Israel has constructed a safe fence in the border next to the West Bank to prevent terrorist attacks more effectively. The international community has criticized the safe fence for limiting transportation and demanded its deconstruction. Colonies. Israel has planted colonies on the West Bank and Gaza after seizing control in them in 1967. In 2000, Israel withdrew from Gaza. The international community has judged these colonies to be illegal, although they used to belong to Israel until the War for Independence in 1948.